Once again, greetings and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid, and right now we're waiting for Matthew to join us in the booth. He hit me up and he asked me, were we still on for the show, and I told him yes. So you got to give it a few minutes for him to get the message and come on back through. Again, first of all, let me take the time out right now to thank each and every one of you who joined me on the earlier session this morning. I really appreciate it. We really had some fun. We enjoyed ourselves with Scott Ritter, and we're hoping to do the same with my guy Matthew. Okay. I've also sent out a link to my guy, my co-host Rashid, so he could join us. But I sent that out about an hour or two ago, and I did not. I mean, you know how they do me and Rashid. I mean, sometimes he doesn't get the link, sometimes he does, and I'll call him to make sure that he double checks it. Sometimes he gets it later. But again, my guy No Way Out is in the building. Thank you for joining me, No Way Out. Right now we're waiting for Matthew Ehret to join us, and I'm going to be honest with you guys. I am beat. I am absolutely beat, and I'm going to tell you why. We'll go into the news until Matthew comes, but I'm going to tell you why. I did not get home till about 2:00 this morning. You know, I had to handle some business. And then turn around, and it was a 9:00 show, you know. So prayers at 5. Then turn back around, put my daughter on one of my daughters go to public school. The rest because she's autistic. The other kids they're homeschooled. So I had to get her on the bus, and then right after that, I'm doing a live with Scott Ritter. All right, and now I'm here again to do a second show. So we're waiting for Matthew, but we're going to go into the news. You know how we do this thing? We're going to go into the news. Man, I'm telling you, check this out. And Matthew should be joining us. He should be getting my message anytime now. So we're going to stay on as long as it takes to get him on. Make sure he's there now. We know about what just came out about the audio tape of two German top brass said they implicated Brits in plot targeting Crimea Bridge. Also, we know about Macron. Listen, again, this all goes back to what I told you before. Had Russia nipped it in the bud in 2014, these cases of the threats from NATO, the constant provocations from NATO, and all of this other stuff, that would have been to the minimum. Because when Russia would have pulled out those hypersonic missiles back then, and would have allowed the rebels in, I wouldn't say rebels, I'll say the militia in the Donbass to move on Kiev, whichever one you want to say, then this thing would have been over. Right? Remember, I don't know if any of you remember, but remember at the time in 2014, the militias were they were overrunning, and they had broken the Ukrainian armed forces, and they were on their way to Kiev. I sent them. Okay, thank you, Susan. I'll send it to him again. We have somebody in the. I'll send it to him again. And thank you so much. Hold on, everybody. Hold on. Let me see. Give me 1 second. Let's see. Everybody, this is live on the air, so give me 1 second. Matt, this is for Matthew, okay? Get the link. Copied it. All right, I'm sending Matthew the link. And Twitter. Let me go to Twitter. Let me give it to him. Boom. He'll be in a second. He'll be here in a second, everybody. Thank you again, Susan. I really appreciate that. No Way Out says, Rashid, some months ago, the Russians discovered 4 crew members of a Leopard 2 who were killed. They all had German army papers on them in German uniforms. Well, if you remember, I sent it to his Twitter. Susan, I sent it to Twitter. Here he is. He's in the booth right now. I'll bring him up now. That's my guy right there. Let me bring Matthew in. How's it go, Matthew? How's it going, man? My guy.
Hey, Rashid. I'm doing well. I'm doing very well. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Matthew. The show is yours, man. I mean, go in to tell us about this deep state, what's going on, and will they push us to World War III? And then you can elaborate on the connections with the secret societies and everything else. The floor is yours, man.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's a very potent first question, and there's a lot of places I could go with that. But I guess in my words, the way I'm looking at the situation as we speak, my interpretation is that there's not a homogenous consensus of the oligarchy, and when I say oligarchy, I don't mean like because there's the basic definition, which just means any type of society ruled by the few. I don't mean something that underdefined. I specifically am referring to the um, the control mechanism managed by a limited array of families that had dominated feudal Europe for centuries, that managed the Crusades, that were the same families that could trace their power back to the Roman oligarchy, the Roman patrician class of Italy, but more than that, much more than Italy itself. And before that, had a major power base in Babylon, had a huge network that took control of Persia, that dismantled, that undermined Athens, that had a big power base in Egypt. So it's more than just the typical definition of oligarchy that people often think of, which is, oh yeah, there's Russian oligarchs, these mafia types. It's more than that. So what I'm noticing is that we're living at the end of an empire. Well, obviously, everybody watching you knows that. Not that dissimilar from the sort of thing, the rot that that Rome brought upon herself by becoming an empire and going the natural course of empire, which is decadence, rot, decay, mediocrity, hedonism becoming more normalized, people losing access to their better value traditions, the family unit being dismantled, or within that hedonistic sort of degeneracy. So we've got a lot of the same variables at play, similar principles of divide to conquer by a managerial elite that see themselves as gods lording over the masses. But at the same time, because we have something different that we didn't have at the time of Rome, we have a lot of people on the, like 8 billion people on the earth. That's a lot, but we also have um, a technological system in place which involves things like the atom, which can be used for good or for bad, for destructive or constructive uses. We have a lot of technologies that have a lot of good associated with them. The fact that we can live so long, support so many people. We couldn't do this 400 years ago, 500 years ago, before the discoveries and applications of electricity. There's no way you could have more than maybe a billion and a half, 2 billion people at the pre-electricity civilization, working mostly at very labor intensive lifestyles. Everyone would have to work long hours on the farm. You didn't have much of a division of labor. Low cognitive powers would be normalized because everyone's just doing, no tractors, no electrical devices to help you out, no industry. So that type of energy intensive human labor, where humans are behaving more like animals, very low education, low life expectancy, very susceptible to the whimsy of the natural forces of famine, drought. That's feudalism, and so we don't have necessarily the same life that our forebears were living through in that feudal society. But the technologies in place that have allowed us to live longer, have more of us, have these conversations, over electrical medium using satellites that allow us to communicate separated by 1,000 miles, you and I. But we can have this. It's a miracle, beautiful, wonderful, good. But you have the oligarchical worldview that wants to only use these technologies to enslave us as a way to benefit only the wannabe gods, the inner families and their auxiliaries, those who are trusted to be managers of the empire. Usually they're groomed, in certain experiences in Oxford or Cambridge or Eton or Yale, and there's a certain systemic grooming process. They created a mess, though, and we have a bunch of nations on the earth led by, I think people watching you wouldn't be surprised if I made the point that Russia, China especially, but other nations working with those civilizational states, India increasingly, Pakistan, Iran, many countries of the multipolar alliance have done a much better job than we have at reining in and expunging their deep state parasites. It's not fully, the battle isn't won yet, but they've done a very good job compared to us. And so now we have, for the first time, as far as I could see it, there wasn't this in Rome's case, where there's a viable alternative um, cultural, political, economic architecture that has been brought to life, animated by a conjunction of leaders and intelligentsias representing these very old traditions, very good traditions within the Islamic, Christian, Confucian, Buddhist worlds, Hindu. So we're seeing like this interesting, new, powerful phenomenon that's utilizing AI, machine learning, computing, quantum computing, 3D printing, all of the things associated with like the Klaus Schwab, fourth industrial revolution idea. But it's a different philosophy of application of these technologies and a different philosophy of banking as far as the idea of value. There's mechanisms that are similar, like digital banking. We hear discussions of this from Glaziev and others being discussed, but it's not the same idea of what it is that we have coming out of the World Economic Forum freaks that also want their own form of a new currency after the current one blows up under a controlled demolition. And they want that new currency to be based on rewarding people for behaviors that involve eating bugs, encouraging your grandma to go on her death pill to euthanize her instead of, keeping old people alive who are expensive, like not not driving a car and just having a bike instead. So all of these types of behaviors are designed to reward the diminishment of human activity on the earth, while we have a different philosophy in the East. And I don't know what the word East means, but in the multipolar alliance, based on creating abundance, using technology for the benefit of people, training people to become engineers and scientists, and encouraging participation of the individual within a broader process of creation that involves 10, 20-year projects, mega projects like we used to do. So this type of thing shouldn't, according to the New World Order script managers who are sort of overseeing the one world government agenda after the Soviet Union melted down, they had this whole perfect, pristine script for what the consolidation of power under this one world government was supposed to be by now. And due to this multipolar alliance, everything has fallen off of track. And I think now, due to the fact that this alternative economic architecture is viable, it's functioning, it's winning over many, many people of this earth to the Belt and Road Initiative and other things, it's resulting in the Thucydides trap being activated and advanced in a very dangerous way, where certain factions within the oligarchy are obsessed, are more willing to rule in hell than serve in heaven, to the point that they're willing to actually unleash nuclear war if necessary on Russia and China, even if it means a lot of collateral damage to the transatlantic zone that they're based in. But they're willing to do it. But not all of the oligarchy is in accord with this orientation. So we see faction fights. What I'm seeing is evidence of infighting, with different spokesmen representing different aspects of Anglo-American intelligence, doing different things. Like, for example, Tucker Carlson, who, as far as I could see, is tied to intelligence. I see him as being part of the operation to promote a conflict with China. It's been a consistent narrative he's maintained for quite some time. However, he does represent a faction within the American intelligence or American establishment that doesn't see it in their benefit to have an actual hot war with Russia that would bring in, obviously, China. And I think what he did by interviewing Putin was quite good. It was a very useful thing that showcased to me a lack of consensus amongst the inner echelons, or Elon Musk going out speaking relatively competently this week about China and the Thucydides trap, I don't see Elon Musk as being his own man. I see him as like a shell of a puppet used by higher intelligence forces. He's a transhumanist freak with I don't think he even made the discoveries or technologies that we're told he's a genius for having created. I don't think any of that's true. However, he said something useful. I'm not going to say that what he did wasn't useful. And I think, or Jeffrey Sachs being another representative of a certain faction of the technocracy, what they're doing is showcasing to me. I applaud um, efforts to derail the flight forward to nuclear war that they've been assigned to do. Maybe part of their assignment is a charm campaign. They're trying, especially Sachs and others, to charm as much as they can those who make decisions within China, within Russia. I don't think Russia and China are dumb enough. They might have people who are susceptible to that flattery and that, but I think the governing intelligentsia of those countries seem to be pretty aware of the nature of the game and the nature of these auxiliaries. But it's useful in that sense to abort the current agenda or the current model for the New World Order that they've been trying for, and maybe live to fight another day and decades in the future when they can undermine Russia and China more subtly. So that's how I'm looking at the current situation a little bit.
You and I both share that same thought on Elon Musk about being an intelligence asset, and but I believe that of many of them, Zuckerberg and all of the rest of them, because they come out of nowhere and they have these achievements out of nowhere. They become um, billionaires or whatever, and the technology is used covertly by the intelligence agencies. So I believe that about Zuckerberg and the rest of them also. But do you believe, because we often talk about American intransigence and imperialism, do you believe that the British still has some level of control within the American government and policies that are being pushed by the American government?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I've come to that conclusion over my years of research, and I went through the phase that we all go through, that the evil American empire is the cause of all the problems, and it's not untrue. It's not untrue that America has become an empire that did so much damage to the world, but also to itself. And you're like, well, who really, cui bono, right? Like, over the course of JFK's dead body, or in the wake of that, did the American people didn't benefit? America became deindustrialized. It lost its powers of production. Its economy became a hollowed out shell of a decadent consumer cult. The banking structure. I mean, any nation that's going to be viable and strong needs to have a viable banking structure that can be used as an instrument for keeping that system strong. But they've just been using their banking for enslavement, for economic warfare against other countries, and for speculation. I mean, the whole deregulation process launched by Paul Volcker and the Trilateral Commission in the 70s just totally gave over the power of sovereignty from the nation and the elected channels of government to a nexus of supranational entities that have no loyalty to the United States. They want to use the United States for its military power and it's the affluence that it created for itself coming out of World War II. But I've seen no evidence that they care about the United States. And in fact, I think that looking at history and as the context for the last post World War II era, I think that we've been lied to. We were told that the British Empire disappeared. They became, they gave up their colonial possessions. They became a commonwealth, and they gave over the torch of empire to their American cousins. I don't see it that way anymore. If I look at what has caused the murder of presidents, including JFK, but going back to the 19th century, this couldn't have happened without British loyalists masquerading as American patriots who never left after 1776. Some did and went to Canada and created English-speaking Canada, because before that it was just a French colony, Nouvelle France. But and you had a local British-controlled oligarchy with its own institutions in Ontario and Quebec set up, and that were used to undermine the United States from above as part of the monarchy of the Americas. It's been pretty much as far as I could see it, Canada has always been and still is not really a Justin Trudeau was correct when he said that Canada is the world's first post-nation state, but it's not necessarily because of what he did since 2015. It's that's always what it was. It was always a fake nation state, which had some trappings of democracy, but trappings. The deep state structures of the British controls were always embedded in the structure of power within the Privy Council office, the lieutenant governors, the deputy ministers, that all encircled or controlled by London and the associated think tanks and universities that manage and groom the next generation managers coming out of, the University of Toronto, other things. This is what was also some of the British Loyalists remained behind in the 13 colonies and called themselves American patriots, but they were never that. The Cabots, the Lowells, a lot of the families that were rewarded with a lot of money by making a lot of cash off the slave trade, off the opium trade. These are the families that oversaw the bringing in of the Scottish Rite, the Freemasonic Scottish Rite, as sort of the governing lodge loyal to the United Grand Lodge of Britain, into America as the basis of British controls and influence. These are the groups that created the Skull and Bone Society in Yale, run by opium-running families in the 1830s, who modeled it off of older things that were already being done in Britain in the British, Ivy League structure of grooming your elites. So we had a junior managed cult set up there to manage local elites. But this has always been the problem. This is the heart of America's problems. Always is that what was the victory of 1776 wasn't fully resolved. It was a victory, it was a battle, but it wasn't. The war was not won, and there is this idea of living to fight another day on the part of the British Empire. They kept control of their assets. They grew a local managerial overlord class in America that modeled their behavior off of British aristocratic ways of doing things, and being J.P. Morgan, who came out of a British banking house in the 1850s. Junius Morgan was part of the Peabody and Company banking from London, which then became, through Junius Morgan, the father of JP, the American banking complex that was designed to try to monopolize railroads, monopolize newly forming industrial hubs, a lot of it having been created by honest entrepreneurs, farms as well. So it was just this use capitalism as a veneer for economic warfare to gobble up national assets under the name of capitalism, but never that, right? So the whole structure was built up. Albert Pike's KKK grew out of this whole Scottish Rite Freemasonic operation that itself was formed by a previous paramilitary occult operation that Albert Pike participated in under the Franklin Pierce administration in the 1850s, called the Knights of the Golden Circle, which was an attempt to something like 80,000 members of this paramilitary group that, again, was revamped into the KKK after the Civil War was finished. And the idea was to create a southern empire liberated of the North. It would then have a slave system with colonial controls over Mexico. They had a plan to invade Mexico using the British and the French that were working to assist the Confederacy. Cuba was supposed to be the center of this new capital of this empire that would be an expansive empire of slavery. All of South America was supposed to be under this dominion. People like, forgetting. Well, anyway, most of the problems of Latin America can be actually found rooted in this aborted attempt at creating this fascist slave occult. And I say occult because this Albert Pike and what the Jefferson Davis administration was a proto-fascist occult organizational system, reviving esoteric Gnostic mystery religions in the form of what the Scottish Rite was doing. Read Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. He goes through this in 1871 in a lot of detail. this is what was interfacing with the Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophists via Colonel Olcott, who is the co-founder of the Theosophists with Blavatsky, a Russian mystic, who is she was a princess, actually, part of the older Russian nobility that hated Alexander II, the Tsar who liberated the serfs and was friends with, was really a blood brother, not a blood brother, a spiritual brother with Lincoln. So the reformers around Alexander II, who was assassinated by this network, was an enemy of the old families of Russia that utilized the occult underground that Blavatsky was a part of. This same thing was what was, this is why Russia saved America during the Civil War, right? In 1863, the Russian fleet was sent by Alexander II to save the Union. And both Lincoln, his murder, and that of Alexander II was initiated by the same occult underground, utilizing certain, terrorist cells of anarchists, the disposable anarchists. This is what also killed McKinley and earlier Garfield. Also, there's many Russian leaders, interior ministers, foreign ministers who were friends of the American system, the real American system of Lincoln and all of the great American leaders who were shot, who were also killed. German leaders around Otto von Bismarck, fans of, or members of the Friedrich List Society, Friedrich List being the American system representative in Germany that created the Zollverein. So they were killed by these terrorist groups. And the terrorist groups were always managed by an occult underground of a high command. This is what the KKK was, and this is what interfaced with things like the British Roundtable movement, of Cecil Rhodes, of Lord Milner, which oversaw a think tank that created networks, inroads in America with the Fabian Society, another British think tank, set up as two governing control mechanisms that interfaced with each other. Both being united in a common view of global empire, creating a new global religion, creating a new managerial class of a disciplined elite of mystics that would then be processed to be the occult high upper management. And they penetrated America, through the Theodore Roosevelt administration, who brought in many advisors from this network that oversaw a lot of imperial wars in Latin America, subduing Latin American countries under this beast to the heel of the United States. They came in great force under Woodrow Wilson, overseeing the Federal Reserve, overseeing the creation of the League of Nations. People like Walter Lippmann, right? John Dewey are both two big figures in this, running the American branch of the Fabian Society. They're closely working with those. Well, I mean, Lippmann ends up also setting up the Council on Foreign Relations in 1921 as the American branch of the British Chatham House, Royal Institute for International Affairs. So this is the thing. This is what Hillary Clinton called the mothership, in 2009. It's this is the deep state. It's the British Empire under a new name, but it utilizes Americans who are not American. Their heart is still in the aristocratic structure of controls of the British Empire and the older families going back to the ancient times of the mystery cults. And they're just bodies are born in America, but that's all they are. The real Americans are not welcome into that party.
Well, I remember one time we were talking and we were having a discussion similar to this, and you were talking about certain people back when America was in her revolution against British rule, and you were telling me some of the people were actually agents of the British Empire. Would you mention a few of those people who actually are revered today as revolutionists, but they actually were working for the British Empire?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the most notable, I think, most important figure, this kind of Mephistopheles type of character, is Aaron Burr. Who there's actually a lot of books written by New York Times writers who are getting paid by questionable. I don't know where they're getting paid, but there's a lot of effort to rehabilitate Burr's image. Burr is one of these, I think, more important entry points to begin to map out some of these American patriots who are not American patriots, who are actually anti-American. dullest personality types, the Averell Harriman personality types, back in the Revolutionary period. George Washington didn't trust him at all, fired him, tried to, because he was basically doing espionage. He was building up little during the Revolution against the British. He was, creating little cells of spies within Washington's army. Washington, for some reason, couldn't completely get rid of him. He had to send him off to some Canadian operation where he found him. No, he actually sent him off. He just fired him, and he got himself enmeshed somehow, though he was never sanctioned to do this, with the effort to take Canada under Benedict Arnold and that whole effort to take Montreal and then Quebec. And Anton Chaikin, who's an amazing historian, has written a book back in the 80s that I found to be one of the most useful books on this topic for people who want to really know this. If I have it easily at hand, I do. Treason in America and Who We Are. Treason in America was written by Anton Chaikin in the 80s, 1985 or something. This one is his newest book, Who We Are, Volume 1. And they go through this network of deep state operatives around Aaron Burr in great detail, and how Burr, not just, he's famous for killing Hamilton, his arch nemesis, in 1804. But he also he's sort of the founding father of Wall Street. I mean, the Bank of Manhattan was created by him using a scheme that he somehow found himself in charge of, what was supposed to be a project to build water infrastructure in New York. And that was going to use Hamilton's Bank of New York to fund it, and another bank. He basically got control of it. He somehow had a lot of protection with high-level powers even back then. I don't fully... you just smell it. You don't know exactly what the details are, but he had a lot of protection. And anyway, he converted it into a private speculative bank. He never built the water projects, and the Bank of Manhattan was the consequence of that. And then that bank then grew like a cancer to become Wall Street. That's the first bank of the Wall Street complex that wanted to basically turn America's idea of finance into speculation, British free trade instead of utilizing protectionism. And so Hamilton's National Bank, that was created in 1791, is often attacked as being a proto Federal Reserve, and Hamilton has been characterized as a Rothschild agent who created a Federal Reserve operation, and Andrew Jackson in the 1830s is sold as the great American hero, Old Hickory, who stopped the evil Hamiltonian National Bank. And it's like, wait a minute. First of all, why did if Hamilton was such an evil guy, why did he fight so hard to ensure that a guy who he didn't like as a person, but he fought to get Thomas Jefferson elected president against Burr, and he was the decisive factor. He fought to stop Burr from becoming governor of New York in 1804 after he thwarted Burr's attempts to become president. Had Burr become president at those times in 1890, or become governor of the most powerful economic engine in the Americas, New York, in 1804, if he'd been successful in either account, there were secessionist plots already set up, but it was based upon a British organized agenda. The archival letters of Anthony Merry, the British ambassador to the United States, were uncovered decades later, writing to the British Foreign Office, Bentham, saying that we have recruited, that Aaron Burr has devoted his service to the empire. He's a lame, he can't do much as vice president, but he is a man of great talent, and he is working now for us. And when you can actually reconstruct, and Anton, as well as Jerry Therrien, another historian I work with, and myself in my books, we've reconstructed the three separate efforts to break up America, undo the Constitution, and have a special relationship with Britain via Canada that Burr oversaw in 1800, 1804, and again in 1807, where he tried it again after Hamilton was killed. In each case, his operatives, he had a whole machinery that was created under his watch, that involved people like Andrew Jackson, whose mansion provided the first headquarters for Burr in 1807 to carry out the third and last, or not the last, but the third secession attempt that would involve Burr taking control of the Louisiana territories that had just been purchased by Napoleon. And there was like a Smedley Butler type whistleblower within his network who was a senator. And he basically blew the whistle because the idea was for Burr, using one of his assets, Colonel Wilkerson, who he had made governor of the Louisiana territories, who they were working together to take control of that zone on the west, then use that with British assistance and British military forces, as well as some paramilitary American agents, to declare war on Spain, take Mexico, take Louisiana, take New Orleans, and then use that new influence to then take control of Washington, kill the president, that would have been Jefferson, and install Burr as the chief, overseeing a new breakaway government, a new confederation, integrated with British assets in Canada, that would have become a new Northern Confederacy, and the Southern slave power was meant to be its own new confederacy, having a whole economic system, dependent on slavery. And again, the base of operations was Andrew Jackson's mansion, was the headquarters of this conspiracy. It was brought to the attention of Jefferson. They had a congressional inquiry. Sadly, not enough smoking gun material was on hand at that moment that the inquiry was happening. So Burke kind of got off, but everyone knew we had a more honest press. So the people of America hated Burr. They recognized it was being covered quite closely in the newspapers. So he couldn't live in Canada. He couldn't live in the United States comfortably. He was getting like apples and eggs thrown at him. So what does he do? He takes $40,000 from John Jacob Astor, who had just purchased Astoria, right, on the other side of the continent. And he takes that $40,000, overseen by Astor, who's making his money on opium, and goes north, where he gets sanctuary in Canada, where his nephew-in-law is now the Governor General of Canada, whose name is escaping me, but it's in my book, Fascists to America's Volume 1. And his nephew, Governor General of Canada, gives him letters of communication, letters to basically open doors in the higher echelons in Britain, where he meets Lord Castlereagh, who's working with the Jesuits, preparing to oversee the restoration of the monarchies in 1815. He gets meetings with Jeremy Bentham, the head of British intelligence, who writes the hedonistic calculus and designs the panopticon, which is used as the base of the current dragnet of the Five Eyes. That's Jeremy Bentham. Jeremy Bentham lets him live in his house for 5 years. So now he spends 5 years from 1807 to 1812 living in Jeremy Bentham's house, in his degenerate diaries, talking about how this is the greatest time of his life. And it's basically whores and opium all the time, all day, like hobnobbing it with the upper Hellfire Club, echelons of the British Empire. And Burr comes back. He arrives back on the shores of America when? Like 2 weeks before the War of 1812 is unleashed as a second attempt by the British to destroy America. And during that context, his machinery is rebuilt. He rebuilds and Martin Van Buren is his lawyer, who becomes president later on, after Jackson. And he rebuilds the machinery. He sets up the Hartford Convention as well in 1814 during the war against Britain to again have another attempt to break up the Union, divide it into a free northern society run by the northern branch of the Scottish Rite, with the southern branch as its own separate confederacy run by the southern branch of the Scottish Rite. That was the whole point. That didn't work. There were still too many patriots at the time around, people like Henry Clay, what were known as the Hawks. These were the followers of Alexander Hamilton, who didn't want to sacrifice the United States, and they fought to keep the war against Britain going, to keep the nation intact, to revive Hamilton's National Bank. William Morse was played a big role in this. Many others did, John Jay and others, and they succeeded by a hair's breadth of getting one of their key leaders, John Quincy Adams, fortunately elected as president, who was one of the leading figures of this Hamiltonian American system faction that was against Burr and the British deep state. And it wasn't long lasting. I mean, Quincy Adams was out after only one term, but he was like a really, long serving congressman. He was the guy who trained Abraham Lincoln. They resisted every effort to turn America into an empire through the Spanish, the American Mexican War. Lincoln and Quincy Adams were leading a fight against that, getting America to stop this and restore its proper constitutional traditions. Quincy Adams was also doing a great job fighting, in cases like the Amistad as well and other things. So you had this, but during that time, other Whig leaders and the best of the patriots at this time were organized around the Whigs. This is what became the Republican Party in 1856, because the Whig Party, like all parties, gets infiltrated, it becomes corrupted. But two of their leaders became presidents. William Harrison in 1840, and then later on Zachary Taylor in 1851 or 1850, both of whom died while in office, right? One after 3 months. William Harrison was a Hamiltonian, a protectionist, somebody for internal improvements. And after 3 months, he died with, on his desk in the White House was an act to revive Hamilton's Third National Bank. It had already passed the Senate and the Congress. It just needed a signature when he became violently ill, probably poisoned. He was spewing up black oo, and then died without fulfilling that mandate. And then 10 years later, when the Whigs were able to rally back control, they got Zachary Taylor in, a war general, a patriot, and he was dead after 2 years. Again, he was working to fight this oligarchical agency, and after he died, then you had the full Freemasonic takeover of America under Franklin Pierce. This is where the Mazzini, Palmerston groups became fully dominant in the U.S. federal government, and they set the groundwork for the Knights of the Golden Circle, right? They're the ones who sanctioned the creation of this organized, racist, paramilitary group of imperialists in America, to run by intelligence agencies, to be the bedrock of the new empire of the Americas that would be always beholden to the higher imperial structures of London. And the rest is history.
Well, do you think that they still have their tentacles around all of the different I know the answer to this, but I'm asking you for some people out there. Do you think that they still have their tentacles in the different think tanks in the different areas of government?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I brought up the Council on Foreign Relations as one of them, but this whole network that came in under Wilson also created the Brookings Institute in 1909 or 1908. A lot of the think tanks, especially those that were brought online during the Cold War, at the early stages of the Cold War, have the same British-directed agency of traders behind their creation. A lot of the ones that brought in the libertarian philosophy as like a parasitical philosophy into the Republican Party, which was historically anti-free trade. It was the party under Lincoln or under McKinley or I mean, there's so many leaders. Warren Harding also died a mysterious death, right? But the Lincoln Republicans that was the party of protectionism, public credit, national banking, as well as private sector encouragement. You want a robust, active citizenry engaged in entrepreneurialism. You want that too. It's not either or. It's not a communist. Are you a commie or are you a free trade, capitalist? Pick one. And it's like it's not so dichotomizable. Like the real traditions of what gave rise to all the bursts of progress that allowed us to leap over the limits to growth and break the Malthusian formulas of population control were always done at times when you had an integration of both of those aspects of cherishing individual entrepreneurialism, the role of the individual citizen and their sacred rights, at the same time as you had the utilization of national power to do big things as at the same time. So that's every time a nation kind of starts tapping into that power of of maximizing the benefit of the individual parts of the nation and the nation as a whole, as a whole that's more than the sum of its parts, because the nation exists beyond our generation, right? We're mortal, but the nation may or may not be mortal. It depends on what we do or don't do to maintain the vitality, the moral vitality of the society that we're born into. So it's more than the sum of its parts in that sense. That being said, the the program after World War II, especially from the British Empire, the High Command, was to infiltrate the two dominant parties in America and convince increasingly Republicans that you have to be an Austrian school libertarian if you want to be a Republican, meaning no national banking. Ideologically, you're going to become castrated from even allowing your mind to think about the possibility or the use of a national bank or of protectionism, which, according to like Friedrich von Hayek or Karl Menger, is essentially equivalent to tyranny and thus evil. That's why they glorify people like Andrew Jackson, who became a hero under their propaganda, who was a guy who he paid the debt. Sure, he paid the debt, and he beat the Hamiltonian National Bank. Sure, he did those two things, but he also destroyed America. He canceled all public works in the 1830s to pay the debt. Where did he get the money to pay the debt? He canceled the Erie Canal projects, the offshoots of the rail development projects that were being built up under John Quincy Adams. All of that was canceled under him. And then he used that new money that you're not spending on building the nation to pay your debts to the foreign bankers. And at the same time, he opens up the door to massive free trade, no more protectionism, no more planning. And now with that volatility of, everybody for themselves, maximize your profit, avoid, maximize pleasure, avoid pain, which are the principles of Adam Smith. That became the norm of what America's economic destiny was in the 1830s, and that immediately resulted in the bank panics of 1837, a complete anarchy case of America going into chaos. The dollar collapsed in value, inflation skyrocketed, volatility of bull and bear markets was like the norm. You couldn't plan anything out because of that volatility. So that's what was like brought back under a rebranded fashion via the Austrian school. And that was like implanted through things like the Heritage Foundation, the Cato Institute. A lot of these things were built up and financed by the Lamont powers, all of the pro-Nazi American fascist networks that were trying to kill Roosevelt in the bankers coup. That was blocked by Smedley Butler. Those same agencies that were tied to the J.P. Morgan complex, to the Rockefeller, the DuPonts, the all of that was behind what created the American Liberty League as sort of the first fake American think tank of that sort to promote American, like basically saying that, look, that's Europe's war, let Europe fight its war. The reality was, if you look at who was financing it, all of these American fascists who were promoting Nazism in America, or it was more Mussolini fascism that was promoted in America. Henry Luce, had Mussolini and Hitler as Times Man of the Year and ran Fortune magazine. He was part of this complex that was working with Allen Dulles and other things. They didn't. It's not like they wanted to just simply keep America out of the war because they just love America. It's like, no, they had a plan that was already negotiated decades earlier with their British masters to use fascism as a tool to create a one world government managed by fascist regional controllers. Mussolini and Hitler would control Russia as a slave colony, and the Japanese fascists were promised jurisdictional control over China as their slave colony. Britain would have their special relationship. The Anglo-American axis would control most of the Americas, and like India would be controlled by the British. So there's this negotiation for a global world government under regional structures of control. This is what Coudenhove Kalergi put online with his Pan Europa movement that was brought into the Council on Foreign Relations via Walter Lippmann in the 20s and 30s. This is what Roosevelt was fighting. And this is what perverted the UN declaration, like the UN charter. When Roosevelt died, the San Francisco Convention was overseen by these creeps that Roosevelt was not even meeting with. He wouldn't allow himself to get within 20 feet of Coudenhove-Kalergi, and Kalergi tried. God knows he tried. And it was only when Roosevelt died and Truman comes in that Kalergi all of a sudden has a field day, getting everything he wants from the U.S. And Coudenhove-Kalergi represents the same Habsburg Empire. His family is, it's an ancient Venetian Habsburg family brought in, on both sides of the family. And he represents one of the old establishment, the black nobility. And part of that is like what was the leading intellectuals of the Habsburg Empire was Karl von Menger, the Austrian school. That Karl von Menger, who was the founder of the Austrian School of Economics, was the retainer of the I think it was, I forget which Habsburg it was, but in the 1870s, the Habsburg who was in charge, who was the heir to the whole empire. Otto von Habsburg becomes Coudenhove-Kalergi's prodigy, who then runs his Pan-Europa movement all the way up until the 2011 when he dies. And all that to say, these groupings who tried to kill Roosevelt, they tried to overdo the business coup, they tried to keep America out of the war because they were promised a big piece of the fascist pie of the New World Order. That's all they wanted, was their fascist piece of the pie. They didn't want America out of war. And so when that didn't work after Pearl Harbor, they had to sort of rebrand. It became very, it became difficult to maintain a pro-fascist or, type of approach. So they had to they were disbanded, but those like the Prescotts, the Harrimans, all of these higher clans, the Morgans, they didn't stop doing it. They were still financing and bankrolling Hitler. I mean, that's what, Rockefeller's Standard Oil was still providing all the petroleum needs of the Nazi war machine throughout the war. They then financed, once Roosevelt dies, you have the UN, which has some good things within the UN Charter as an ideal, but that's very rarely acted upon based upon what Roosevelt had done with the Atlantic Charter in 1941. So there were some good ideas, and that's why Russia and China still always cite the UN Charter as an antidote to the rules-based order, which is like who has the power makes the rules order. It's whatever. Because there is something viable and good about the defense of the sovereign nation state, the legalization of wars of aggression that's built into the UN Charter. That's good. You can work with that. But then there's this other stuff that allowed for the creation of NATO, like Article 52 and 53 by Coudenhove-Kalergi's articles that allowed for regional creations of powers like the European Union or NATO that would not have been allowed had they not infiltrated the UN Charter. So you have this thing, and they created these groups bankrolled, again, Heritage Foundation, Cato Institute. And then on the one hand, while they're infiltrating these ideologies of libertarianism into the Republican movement under the guise of the Cold War, which is like psychologically terrorizing, of an experience for a lot of people. It's a point of a lot of corruption. The Scottish right is got full control increasingly under J. Edgar Hoover, who's running the FBI. Even today, it's a Scottish right operation. The FBI is not an American thing. And so this is overseeing 8 presidencies and overseeing the murder of many presidencies and many senators and many congressmen whose names we have been written out of our own history records, who are trying to resist this thing. So you have that. And then on the other side, you have the Democratic Party that's being infiltrated by Keynesians. So Keynes and von Hayek are like this. They're like tight. They have lifelong friendship. Keynes is a eugenicist pro-world government. Von Hayek is a eugenicist pro-world government. Actually, people who might be offended just needs to read the last chapter of Road to Serfdom, where he calls for a world power, a world control that could veto and control every nation of the earth so that they all abide by the rules of free trade. That's the rules-based international order. It's von Hayek. That's at the heart of Milton Friedman's reforms of deregulation. It's von Hayek. It's the libertarian school. And this is why when you hear people like Klaus Schwab say, the greatest threat to the Great Reset is libertarianism, you know that you're being played. It's like they obviously want you, the resistance to this feudal agenda, to fall into a trap. And so the Keynesians all of the Democrats were told, if you want to be a good Democrat, you have to be a Keynesian. A British imperial fascist Keynesian is what you have to be a good Democrat. And they were told that that's what Franklin Roosevelt was, which he wasn't. Roosevelt was anti-Keynes. He called Keynes a mathematical fetishist, which he was, and Keynes didn't like Roosevelt. Roosevelt was a follower of Alexander Hamilton, whom he wrote his master's thesis about. He studied the Burr operation to break up America. That was what Roosevelt did in college. His paper is still available for those who want to find it, which demonstrated a very solid insight into the nature of the British deep state operation in America. He came from a ruling patrician family, so he knew it quite well, especially on the Delano side of the family that made its fortune off the opium trade. So he had direct experience of this thing from his own family. They thought that they could use and trust him because he was part of the sort of Ivy League families, but they didn't realize his heart lay elsewhere and his mind had a better understanding of things. And he was corrupt in World War I. I think he was a corrupt person. And the thing is, his polio was a very humbling experience in the late 20s. And he became a better man. Like he went through a life-altering crisis that had him revisit a lot of the ideas and ideals of his youth and study it very seriously during his years of recovery. And according to everybody who knew him and who wrote about this, he became a completely different man, animated by a different purpose and a love of his soul and God and the nation's ideals. So that's why they had to kill him. And so, yeah, he was anti-Keynesian. But we've all been told by the officially sanctioned history books that he was a Keynesian because they want the Green New Deal. They don't want the New Deal of Roosevelt. They want the Green New Deal, which is a Keynesian idea of a system of managerial controls to reward behavior that reduces human impact on the environment, aka that's another way of saying kills people, reduces the means of supporting people by rewarding behavior that's green. And then they want the Republicans to be, Austrian school ideologues who can only think to dismantle government, decentralize, think local, which falls right into the plan of those who want to divide to conquer us. There's no idea of organizational structure at all in the more moral, what I would say the most moral part of the resistance to this evil. They've been really crippled by this, just decentralize, just think local. And I mean, this type of thing, if you want to fight the oligarchy, you got to do like China and do like Russia. You got to like use the power of the state as a weapon to do battle with the oligarchy. The oligarchy, they got a lot of power. They're happy if you decentralize and think local. They want that. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't think local. You should know how to do things and garden. And if you can own property if you can. But for Christ's sakes, like people are living in hard times. When I hear people like Catherine Austin Fitts or, a lot of the Robert Malone or anybody who's like a celebrity in the alt-right community say, cash is king, just pay your debts, buy your land, buy gold. And it's like, fuck, like 98% of people hearing that are living paycheck to paycheck in debt. Like how disempowering is that? Where like, if you want to fight the oligarchy, think like Martin Luther King Jr., like organize with discipline, and think like, to a certain degree, the closest thing that I see approximate that is sort of in America is what Trump was able to do by capturing the federal power for a limited time. We saw how how the oligarchy reacted to that, but that's the sort of thing that can be viable. Take back the nation. You be rigorous and disciplined in people's idea of organization. Work to try to create. Work with countries who are fighting the oligarchy. Like if we were serious about saving our children and saving our nation, we would want to look to other nations that have successfully battled their deep states and are fighting the oligarchy by bringing about, real abundance and prosperity and making technology and banking used for the greater good and not just for the good of the elite. We instead of wanting to go to war with them or drinking Kool-Aid that tries to paint China as some like evil boogeyman that wants to kill us, or Russia as the evil boogeyman. If you're a Democrat, that's what you get. People get Kremlin evil enemy of America wants to destroy you using Trump and right-wing conservatives. That's your enemy is Russia. And the Republicans are told, no, your enemy is the Chinese Chi-Coms who put Justin Trudeau and Joe Biden in power, and they're the ones running Joe Biden's secret armies as that's your enemy is China. Both have good people who don't want their kids to die within both camps, but both are so mentally mushy and sloppy on this basic elementary history I'm just like laying out here, that they fall prey to the narratives that are created for them, that have profiled them to know exactly what they're going to respond to in fear and anger, and avoid the issue of, well, what is the British Empire? How did it never disappear? How is it still controlling your world? Let's look at that. But it gets lost in the conversation.
I want to go back to China and Tucker Carlson in just a second, but I want to ask you a question. Why do you think that they write out of history that a fascist coup was underway under Roosevelt, and that the people who tried to institute this coup never went to jail, and their children or their family members are in government now and in think tanks now?
Yeah, it's a lot of corruption, eh? It's so bad. Yeah, you got people who literally walked into the Congress in total peaceful protest during January 7th. They walked in, you see the video footage, no violence. They're like taking pictures like they're on, a tour, staying within the the poles, the velvet poles, and like, they're one of them, I think, stole a computer or something from Nancy Pelosi. That's like the worst thing that I think happened as far as like most of these protesters. Then you have what has become revealed as being a lot of FBI agents everywhere as provocateurs that have been proven to be the case, trying to egg people on to get violent, who are doing violence. A lot of them were tied to Antifa as well. Whole books have been written. It's been proven that this is like the whole thing. Everything bad was done by FBI operatives, um, and ultimately people are in jail. They're still in jail without having been charged in American prisons for something that, we there's an effort to try to rewrite our history, because they don't believe in truth. They believe in who has power writes the history books. And so they've been obsessed with trying to redefine what January the 7th was, 2020, as being worse than the Civil War. That's what Joe Biden has said many times. That's what all of the left liberal intelligentsia are just repeating this narrative. This is the worst thing since 9/11, since the Civil War. And they're trying to get Trump off the ballots entirely. Some states have gone more further on this than others. It's really lawfare. It's insane. And if you look at Biden, yeah, like you said, the Biden crime family is just the most obviously provable. Susan says January 6th. Thank you, Susan. January 6th, not January 6th. I don't know why I said 7th. Weird. Too much in my head right now. It's not thinking properly. But yeah, so the Biden crime family is so demonstrably corrupt, tied to graft and Burisma, overseeing biolabs, biowarfare facilities in Ukraine, and everything in between you could imagine. And I'm, obviously leaving out the obvious stuff here. It's just everywhere. And Biden oversaw and gloated over having fired the attorney general or the prosecutor general of Ukraine in 2015 or 2016. He bragged at a CFR event saying that he basically got this guy fired by threatening to withhold money unless this guy was fired. Because why? He was investigating the Biden crime family and their dirty dealings with Burisma and Igor Kolomoskoy. So he bragged on TV. He was that brazen about it. And despite that, they allow this type of creature and his whole nest to continue in a position of power. It's a disgusting irony. I don't know. I'm speechless.
Well, let's go back to China, and this is something that I've made mention of on multiple shows, and not specifically about Tucker Carlson, but about a lot of the pundits who speak. If you listen to their mannerism, when they talk about Russia, the war in Ukraine and stuff, some of them, they're outraged at that. And then they point the people to China as, and that's an acceptable war for them. And I'm like, why is everybody missing this pivot? Forget Russia, let's go tackle China. I mean, this is absolute insanity, but nobody addresses this. Why do you think this is going on?
It's painful, eh? It's painful. they're good people, but there's this. America is an exceptional nation as an idea. There's freedoms that were made normalized in the American context that are exceptionally good. It was a miracle that the American Revolution happened, and that kind of nation built around the ideals of the consent of the governed, the general welfare, the idea of the inalienable rights of all people. These are miraculous that could be brought online as an active force and not just like sitting in the realm of philosophical ideas, while the reality is oligarchs running feudalist structures are the forever thing. Um, it took a lot of brilliant organizational planning, a lot of beautiful ideas, a lot of people willing to die for a high ideal to make it happen. And when it's acted upon, those ideals, it's good. It produces good fruit. Things get better. We become happier, more self-aware, right? Our nations become stronger. We become more desirous of having families because we're secure knowing that our grandkids are going to live in a happy world that's flourishing. So we want to have kids. We're proud of our society. We're more thus disciplined, less inclined to want to abuse our minds or treat our minds it poorly by doing drugs or other things. You don't want to because you know that your mind works best when when you have a sober, clear-headed orientation. You want to do these things. You don't want to escape reality when you have good reason to be positive about your world. And then you see that other nations who have lived in poverty or in scarcity or were abused by empire are benefiting by your example. It's a great feeling to see that, oh, damn, we are a role model, a city on a hill that other people of the world aspire to, aspire towards. And that's a great thing. But like John Quincy Adams said, we must never go around chasing monsters to destroy. That is a gateway to hell. As soon as we start taking on that type of crusader mentality as our identity, now you're in the gateway to corruption. It's not too many steps before you all of a sudden start wielding your power to oppress and keep people poor and under and exploited for the benefit of your elite. Unfortunately, in America, there's too much of that abuse of the exceptional ideology, and people were told they became kind of arrogant. We are the chosen people. That's what gives us the right to do what we did to the natives here, to the whatever, right? Pick a minority group and you'll find injustice done willfully. And so this exceptional chosen people thing really becomes fascist pretty easily. Now, in the Cold War, Americans were given a lot of propaganda that they are the bastion of freedom and democracy and capitalism. It was repeated every day. And unfortunately, that was happening while JFK was getting murdered. The CIA was taking control of the U.S. conventional military and purging the military of its nationalists and installing their own agents. They were creating the Green Beret, modeled on the British Special Services. My wife's writing a series of essays on this that it's just blowing my mind. But yeah, the Green Berets were created, modeled on the British Special Forces. Always beholden to the CIA as their command structure, not the conventional military. That's where they were used in Vietnam. They were used across Latin America. That's where Panama became the key training center of the Green Berets and this whole control center of Latin America under the CIA throughout the 60s, 70s into I never ended in that sense. So, when I hear that Taiwan is now celebrating that they're bringing in Green Berets into Taiwan, and you got more military deals with an expanded NATO pressing on China's perimeter and Russia's perimeter in the Pacific. And then I hear podcasts, or I talk to Republican patriots who are so confused. They're so confused. They don't see the Green Berets. They don't know. They don't understand the evil that was done under the Green Berets in Vietnam. We have this John Wayne image of the Green Berets. No, the burning of the villages to save the villages, that was done under the control of special forces operatives. This became a conduit for highly satanic operations like Michael Aquino, who Colonel Michael Aquino, who worked out of Fort Bragg and was worked with Edward Lansdale oversee the revolution in military affairs that brought in, like, psychic warfare, mind wars, all the stuff that was then brought into also NATO. This guy was the head of the Church of Set, the Temple of Set. He was the lieutenant of Anton LaVey of the Temple of Satan. His lieutenant created the Temple of Set and was the colonel who brought in the revolution in military affairs. So, I mean, like, this is evil stuff here. This is what oversaw Desert Storm. This is what oversaw 9/11. This is what oversaw the whole regime change operation in the last 25 years and the dragnet surveillance state of the Five Eyes. It's all these. This is actually run by Satanists. To be clear on this is what's there. And Americans were told by these Alan Dulles-run forces that they are the nation of liberty against evil commie baddies. And they were just given this every day. The communists are out to infiltrate you and destroy you. The communist Russia hates you and wants to destroy your freedoms. China wants to destroy your freedoms in the 50s and the 60s. Kids, baby boomers were given, the trauma of duck and cover, things, emergency things, and not knowing what the hell is going on. Nuclear wars hanging over everyone's head. Their brothers were coming back in body bags from Vietnam, and drugs provided by the CIA were provided all across the campuses of America that came out of MK Ultra. So, I mean, it was bad. Like the baby boomers were targeted for full spectrum psycho-spiritual warfare to create a new type of society that had never existed before, based upon me first, thinking my senses, my feelings as the basis of truth, not reality, but my feelings, expanding, creating new realities with mind drugs that were promoted by Timothy Leary and Huxley and other godfathers of the counterculture. And this whole thing became a romantic, mystical, new age revolution to create what the oligarchy always wanted, which was this new age, this new age of mankind purged of its belief in gender, right, wrong, family traditions, God. All of that was the old culture. The counterculture was going to be counter to the old obsolete culture. That's the new age that they want to bring in, and it was made. It was assisted by these insane wars. We weren't paying attention to all of the governments that were overthrown, from Mossadegh to Diem to, I mean, it's a long Arbenz it's a big list. They tried to kill Nasser, de Gaulle. They did kill JFK and his brother. There's so many people around the world. Lumumba and Kwame Nkrumah was overthrown by the CIA, all of this stuff. And then it goes on into the 70s and 80s. And it's like Americans weren't paying attention. They allowed themselves to become corrupt with the idea that, no, we're the best. We're the best. Look at all of the great stuff we buy, and this corruption allowed them to ignore what their minds could know very clearly is all of this wealth is happening by theft, keeping other people your slaves in Africa. Keeping them poor is what was the basis of keeping Africa non-industrialized, was the basis of extracting and stealing the wealth for our lifestyle to be maintained. Same thing for Latin America. Though, I mean, every nationalist government from Allende on, and even before that, Raul Goulart of Brazil was overthrown by this complex when he was trying to nationalize Brazilian light and traction, and same thing for all of the leaders who tried to fight. They didn't get Castro. God knows how they didn't get Castro. I have no hats off to Castro. This guy survived like 90 assassination attempts. No idea how he did that. But yeah, Americans they're drunk on a lot of this propaganda. And so it's painfully ironic that they tend to like Russia because, Russia's full of white people that sound more Christian than they do. Like they're actually acting Christian. So they're like, I can identify with the white people who are Christian, but the Chinese don't look like me. They don't sound like me. They don't have. So they become very easily susceptible to this type of anti-China conditioning promoted by Steve Bannon and Robert Malone and so many influencers. Joe Rogan's promoting this that celebrates. Brett Weinstein is now going on tour talking about the Chinese behind the immigration crisis from Panama. And it's like, wait a minute. My wife has wrote a whole beautiful essay series on this. It's on her Substack, actually. People should read it. The Panama's been the base of operations of the Green Berets for forever. That's the center. if we want to know who's controlling the immigration crisis, which I agree is a crisis that's being artificially created to destroy or weaken America from within, I agree with all of those things. You want to look at George Soros, Lord Mark Malloch Brown, the infrastructure that's been built up since the 50s by the U.S. military, industrial, and intelligence complex. That's what you want to look at, not Chinese, a bunch of Chinese construction workers trying to build infrastructure and ports and roads in South America. That's why they're there. They're trying to do economic business deals with countries because it's the only way that we're going to avoid World War III is building infrastructure to create win-win relationships. That's China's approach. That's why they're there. That's why they're told not to talk to Michael Yon, right? Who's like a Green Beret Special Forces intelligence, who's like being treated as this American hero, giving Brett Weinstein tours of Darien Gap. And it's like, who the hell is this Green Beret guy on the front lines of Iraq and all this stuff? Like, well, what is he? What is he? Why do we trust him? Somebody, why are we trusting that the Green Berets in Taiwan really want to save Taiwanese democracy and freedom? Has Taiwan ever been a democratic or free society? No. They've been used as a plaything of the Western oligarchs since the Cold War began. The same thing for South Korea or Japan. These are not sovereign nations. These are satrapies of the military-industrial complex. They have no sovereignty. To call them sovereign or democratic is a joke. It's the Western military that runs them, and that have been using them as a base of operations for a war against Russia and China. That's clearly the case. And Taiwan is not its own country. It's part of China. The U.S. State Department website acknowledges that Taiwan is a part of China. Why are they doing business contracts, buying weapons from the U.S. military, or getting grants to buy more weapons by the U.S. taxpayer, or hosting Green Berets for what? So yeah, and then Russia. So last thing I'll say on this, Putin, his response to Tucker was great, because Tucker was sort of feeling him out, right? To see, are you afraid of China? Is there something there that the faction of the American elite that I work for might be able to benefit from by maybe peeling you away from your relationship to China, who you're probably afraid of, because they're doing Freudian projection. They're just like, well, we're an empire. We had power. We projected to oppress the weak under our benefit. So must not every nation want to do that? Must not China want to do that? That's the logic of these Freudian Hobbesians. And Putin's answer was brilliant. He was just like, look, the American elite are more afraid of China than they are of Russia. So just to put to bed Tucker's concern that nobody seems to be afraid of China. They're always afraid of Russia. Isn't that so silly? And Putin was like, no, they're more afraid of China than they are of us, first of all. And China is our best friend. You basically schooled the Americans who are listening to the Tucker Carlson interview, saying, "Look, you're falling into a Chinese boogeyman fraud operation." He made fun of that. He made a point that the reason why your economies are imploding is because you've cut off any relationship with China, which you need if you're going to survive. You need to work with them, not go to war with them. So all of this stuff he was very clear on, and I loved his answer. I've been using it consistently since he said it to my conservative friends who are blocked on this.
So last question. What makes you think that Tucker Carlson is a intelligence asset? You and I know, but I know some of the stuff, but I want you to explain your views on this to the people.
Well, I won't. I don't have the facts. I have a notebook full of facts, which I didn't commit to memory. I know that Putin did take a fun jab at the very beginning of that interview, saying like, it's a good thing you never got accepted when you applied for the CIA as a young man. It's good for you that you didn't get accepted, right? Wink, wink. And then he kept on little pregnant pause, and then he moved on. But Tucker's father was high level intelligence with the CIA. It's part of these. Yeah, it's what they like, recruiting from the youth of people who have been very enmeshed into the machinery of the intelligence state. It's just an easier place to recruit talent out of. We all have a connection to our fathers, a certain sense of identity that's tied to something bigger than ourselves. So it helps if for good or for bad, like if you've got like John Quincy Adams, I keep on talking about him. The fact that his father was John Adams played such a big positive role in history, despite John Adams having some big problems. But despite that, he played a positive role in history. that played a role, right, in empowering young John Quincy Adams at seeing himself in a way which was very noble and very useful. But unfortunately, like people, this can be used in the other direction too often, is to give a sense of elitism, a sense of like you have a legacy that you're a part of, and there's things like the Kingsman movies. We see this, how this is used in just pop culture, right? Look at it, watch the Kingsman movie and how the young, like, American, or no, not American, he's like a British, typical kid in this modern revamped James Bond story. How his character is built up. His father was this great elite high commander from the British intelligence who died, and his father's best friend is the one recruiting him, and now he's going to step into the family shoes. So there's that element of it. Tucker, when I look, so there's a variety of things. I might write something on this actually, so I won't say any more in terms of detail on that point. But I would say also, if you look at what he does, or like what his messaging is, it's been pretty consistent. That his role, and I thought it was very interesting to watch his little back and forth with who's that pedophile guy, Hollywood actor, played in American Beauty. Forgetting his name. Somebody in chat. The guy who played the president of America in that show, the sociopathic president, Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey. So he had that weird Christmas interview with Kevin Spacey, right? And Kevin Spacey is one of these characters who's obviously sold his soul. He's got a whole really big trail of underage sex abuse victims, many of whom end up dying before they could testify against him, which is why he's able to say, hey, my hands are clear. Nobody's ever been able to testify against me. It's like, yeah, because they all end up dead before they could go to trial, you creep. But so he did this weird thing, fake interview with Tucker on Christmas as their Christmas gift, saying, what is reality? What is fiction? That's where the creativity is. And Tucker's just eating it up. What the hell is that? What is that? For me, I've followed Tucker for a long time, and I enjoy what he says in terms of, saying things that are not supposed to be spoken in polite leftist society. It's good. But he's also, part of his assignment is to amplify the anti-China narrative. For years, that's been his consistent assignment, is to always splice in the anti-China narrative as much as you can, in order to groom the right to become weaponized in the upcoming war that some want to have planned and unleashed against China. Also, the UFO psyop, a big part of his role. I would say that one of the most important things that the oligarchy wants, beyond destroying Russia or China or the United States under a world government, that's not sustainable by itself. What makes it sustainable is the spiritual controls, right? So just simply having control over the intellectual domain within think tanks or academia, or the physical domain of like the geopolitical physical hard power aspect of things, is not sustainable by itself. You need to have the spiritual psychocultural domain satisfied as the third element to make the first two work. And that's the highest priority of the oligarchy, to be clear, is the creation of controlled synthetic religious structures that give people a sense of being satisfied as being slaves, and being happy with their drugs, happy with their superstitions, that are controlled as mystical or sacred stories of reality, of creation stories, why we are, what we are, where we came from, that are controlled by a technocratic priesthood of higher initiates who are a little bit more in on the joke. Just like the ancient days of Rome, right? You have all of these sacred or creation stories that are obviously like make-believe, but managed, that most people are expected to believe in, while they're doing their hedonistic frenzies and stuff, worshiping Dionysius or whatever bacchanalian frenzy that's keeping them degenerate at night, while they're doing their dutiful Apollonian duties in the daytime, being just very dutiful, trying to like pick your cotton, do your thing as a respectable citizen in daylight. But when the night happens, now you can release the beast that you are. You can satisfy your lusts. But then you've got to go right back to the other extreme, right? It's not that different from how we're controlled under the Dionysian control mechanism today of party hard at night on Friday nights, drop your ecstasy, get laid, go chase experiences like that, and then in the daytime do your daily grind, hate your job, but just do it to pay your bills, be a wage slave, and then do it all over again. And it creates so much disequilibrium that nobody can actually integrate themselves like a mature human must, if we're going to be able to think and use judgment and insight like we must. If we're going to be sovereign citizens capable of self-government, we have to be able to have the conscience, the feelings, and the mind and the reason working in harmony together. You can't do that if this is the type of cultural matrix, this counter cultural matrix that we are expected to adapt to. You can't do that. We need to be, in a sense, lorded over by some master class of zookeepers, because the zoo creatures can't manage themselves, right? It's a fake ideal in that sense. You need to have a managerial elite of scientific managers but so the idea of the UFO stuff, that's also one of Tucker's big assignments, is to prepare the groundwork for UFO disclosure. But in Tucker's case, it's tied to a mystical form of evangelical pseudo-Christianity that was cooked up in British intelligence in the 19th century under Darbyism, which is much more based on demonology and the idea of like looking at the world as being shaped by forces of demons and angels that are at the heart of all good and all evil. It's these supernatural entities that give the oligarchy powers, right? It's not through our own faults or anything like that we're enslaved. It's rather through simply we're victims of the oligarchy having interface with demons and or aliens, or maybe the aliens are the demons, which is kind of the way it's all being weaved together right now. And so one of his assignments, to be straightforward, is to advance that new global religious cult of UFO demonology. And you could hear it in his interviews with the Attorney General or the Surgeon General of Florida, talking about the demons that have been infested into our blood through the injections and things like that. So they're really trying to get people to think about like my bodily fluids. Think, if you want to see how the oligarchy is kind of playing us, what the formula is, if you really want to know, go to Stanley Kubrick's How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, Dr. Strangelove, and look at the character of that military soldier, the general who ends up going renegade, right, and shoots at the U.S. military. And you have Peter Sellers. Well, one of the Peter Sellers characters is like this little guy who's kind of afraid of this American patriot general who's you know what they're putting in our water systems? Fluoride. No, the first to do fluoride were the Nazis to pacify the people, and then bring up chemtrails and the bodily fluids. They want to take our bodily fluids, as he's like shooting and killing other soldiers from the federal government who are trying to get the codes for the nuclear codes that he's like sabotaged, because he believes in the commie conspiracy to steal our bodily fluids that he's obsessed with. It's all about the spirit, and the bodily fluids is everything. So this is where they've gotten a lot of the American patriots into this very, very specific type of spiritualism, which is tied to the idea that my soul is found in my bodily fluids. My blood is what's pure. And now you have pure bloods, right? People who were not jabbed are the pure bloods. And, you have this fixation that, okay, if you've been jabbed, you're an impure blood. There might be an element of truth on a mechanical level, but now it's taken on a spiritual spin to it, where the people who have been jabbed are like infested by other dark forces now that are now embedded in their DNA. They're changing their DNA, so we're being fed all of the stuff that our DNA, we're essentially becoming different categories of human species. Those who have been jabbed, having their DNA changed by the jabs, the mRNA jabs are now a different species. It's something like lower than us because we kept it pure, right? And the people who have been jabbed are looking at those who didn't as like the crazy conspiracy theorists, subhuman Putin stooges. They are subhuman. They're all domestic terrorists anyway. They're subhuman. And so you got this dangerous dehumanization thing going on that's being groomed, that's tied to this mystical imperialist revival thing that people like Tucker, like Elon, who's a big transhumanist, like Joe Rogan, who's a well-meaning dupe, who's just big into this stuff, are promoting, whether they know it or not. Some of them probably do know it, and I think Tucker does know it. That's why he's in on the joke with Kevin Spacey. And unfortunately, fortunately in some ways, the world is kind of out of whack with what their plan was. Their plan was that they would have already have popped, I believe, this whole UFO disclosure thing onto us already, and knew like this is what Christianity was. We would be told this is what Jesus was. All of these stories of like walking on water and things, that was actually done because Jesus was an alien or had powers given to him by aliens, maybe because he was doing psychedelic drugs that gave his brain a chance to vibrate to a frequency that the aliens live on in another 8th dimension. And that's what the pharaohs were doing with their psychedelic plant blight LSD drugs of the ancient Egyptian period that gave them shamanistic powers to see entities of this higher reality that gave them the technology to build the pyramids, blah, blah, blah. Like it just goes on, right? And this has been groomed under Zecharia Sitchin. A lot of CIA-sponsored creative writers have been put to work at this a lot of them are tied to Theosophist movements, which is British intelligence. And again, when you look at the Theosophists, they are tied to Albert Pike as well and the Scottish Rite. They are Luciferian. They are, Gnostic mystery religions that they're in a modern form that they're reviving. And the Lucifer Publishing of the Theosophists was the publishing house that becomes Lucius Publishing under Alice Bailey, the follower of Blavatsky, and who to this very day publishes all of the United Nations literature. Is Lucius Publishing that also finances the meditation chambers, the big meditation room in the United Nations New York headquarters. That's, again, the Luciferian operation. So it's like, it is what it is, like what they're afraid of is authentic Judeo-Christian moral values that are tied to the same type of moral values that we saw emerge in the best times of China, and the idea of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, also expressed in Confucian ethics. You see it in Mahayana Buddhism. You see it in various expressions of Hinduism. There's these moral universal principles that whenever we act according to them, and that are wrapped up in a lot of sacred stories of different cultures, but whenever people act according to those reasonable moral things, we become better people. We leap over limits to growth. We discover laws of the universe, laws of God's creation. We willfully act according to those discovered laws, becoming better people, more actualized, more insightful, less inclined to be exploited by empire, better people. And the empire loses their control. And that's why they wanted to like erase the memory of Africa as well. Like all of these beautiful, Yoruba civilizations and other beautiful civilizations that were obviously, like, there's so much evidence of these great, glorious civilizations all over Africa that they have to just erase. They're desperate to just erase all of that to create these inferiority complexes with all of the people who are targeted for enslavement. They do the same thing in India as well. They just erased whole swaths of Indian memory while the British are under control, right? Because they need to create a new type of cultural, spiritual priesthood managed with only those sacred myths or those traditions that are beneficial to keeping people enslaved. Like you could have the Kama Sutra. That's okay. Right? You want to be an Indian classical scholar, you can do the Kama Sutra. But that's what you could study. But as far as like anything that ties you into the anti-oligarchist movement that gave rise to so much great Renaissance experience of your deep history, no, you're not allowed to learn about any of that. Right? So.
Man, you hit it out the park again, my friend. Yes, you have.
Oh, shucks, dude.
Thank you, man, for joining me. Thank you for sharing this insight with the people. Man, I'm just grateful. Thank you, man.
Oh, dude, man, no, it's always a great pleasure, and I hope people get something out of this. And Susan, aka Susan's actually my mom. She made the point that I forgot the Muslims. Yeah, I mean, I did. I was brushing through things too quickly, but yeah, you have Muslim Renaissance movements throughout history with in the south of Spain and Baghdad, the Baghdad Renaissance. I mean, there's so many periods of great, beautiful architecture and science and everything that have been really obscured by the Crusades the Crusades really did a lot of damage to this. But it's there. We're seeing attempts to revive it currently. China's doing a pretty good job with their outreach and their cultural outreach to try to help other nations in Africa, in the Middle East, to tap back into their greater forgotten heritage. Like, look at CGTN. I mean, I follow CGTN's work quite a bit, and yeah, it's exactly what I said. Like when they talk about building dams or infrastructure in African countries, and they talk about it in their 20-30-minute shows that anyone can watch. They're talking about reviving the ancient, glorious traditions that the Western imperialists have tried to suppress and erase. So, yeah, that's the way to do it. Yeah. But yeah, man, it was a pleasure. I love being on your show.
I wish I would have known Miss Ehret was Susan. I wouldn't have called her Susan, man. You made me disrespect your mother live on there. Miss Ehret, please forgive me. There is no way on earth I would have called her by her first name, man. No way. No way.
She's cool. And I just called her Susan myself, right? So I was like, do I blow her cover? Yeah, why not? I'll blow her cover, sure.
Hey, my mom is watching, and she would get on me about this. I'm a grown man, but my mom is watching too. So, no, Miss Ehret, please forgive me for that. Hey, thank you so much, man. I mean, right, I always have a wonderful time with you, man. And your mom did a wonderful job, Miss Ehret. You did a wonderful job with this guy right here.
Thank you, Mom.
All right. All right, everybody, thank you all for joining us on the most powerful platform for truth anywhere. I mean, you got an earful with my guy, Matthew. He is awesome. I'm telling you, he is. Join us on the next episode. We'll be going live Monday with CIA analyst Larry Johnson, and we'll have Wednesday, I believe it is Wednesday, we'll have Asian correspondent Kiji Noi on also. So join us on those platforms, and we'll be doing some live streams in between. But in the meantime, from my heart to yours, Matthew, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it.
Me too. All right, talk to you later.
All right, man. So everybody, thank you for joining me. Please hit the like button. Please share. And know this, from the bottom of my heart to the depths of my soul, I want to thank each and every one of you for giving me the time that you have allotted for me. I'm truly appreciative, and I'm humbled about it. Thank you so much. And know that I love you if you love truth, but know that my love will always compel to the love that the true and living God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous. Hey, I'm out of here. I love you, Mom. Hey, and I want everybody to know I love my mom too. We're out of here. Peace, everybody. Thank you.